Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Again, we've got three martinis for you. I think there's good elements certainly in the first one, although it's a little bit crazy that we get answers like this from someone who's on the brink potentially of becoming the next president of the United States. The second one's definitely bad, and the third one's definitely crazy. So, Jim, let's dive right in. Yesterday, we talked about how Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC was essentially rewarded by the Harris campaign for carrying a lot of water for Kamala Harris on the Bill Maher show last Friday night, saying, oh, you don't need her detailed answers or policy prescriptions. All you need to know is that Donald Trump is her opponent and he's a big threat to democracy. And so, this isn't Nirvana and we don't live in that neighborhood and all that. So surprisingly, Stephanie Ruhle gets an interview with Kamala Harris. I would say the questions were a little more challenging than I expected, but it basically teed her up to say whatever she wanted and had already pre-programmed on a number of issues. There's a lot of clips we could use to focus on Kamala's word salad today, but even under these friendly circumstances, mostly friendly circumstances, Kamala Harris still struggling mightily. For example, Stephanie Ruhle asking, you got all these ideas about new programs, housing, and all this stuff that you want to pay for. But what if you don't control the Senate? Or what if they don't go along with a corporate tax hike? What do you do then?
Expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share.
We're just going to keep doing the mantra, no matter what the situation is on Capitol Hill. And they never, of course, tell you what the fair share is. What percentage of people's incomes should the government get? How much labor value should you be able to take every year? But then, of course, on so many other things, she was clueless on tariffs, all over the place on a bunch of other issues. But she had her new word of the day, too, Jim, which is always fun. And that's holistic, or holistically.
And assistance to state and local governments around transit dollars. And looking holistically at the connection between that and housing. And looking holistically at the incentives we in the federal government can create for local and state governments to actually engage in planning in a holistic manner that includes prioritizing affordable housing.
So there you go. Not her greatest moment. Again, it shows us why they're reluctant to put her out there. I really enjoyed the fact that after the interview in kind of the post-game show, Stephanie Ruhle said that even though she didn't give clear and direct answers on economic policies, quote, that's okay because we're not talking about clear and direct issues. I would say they are pretty clear and direct when you're talking about people's grocery costs and everything else. So, Jim, it's kind of what we expected, even under the friendliest of circumstances, or about as friendly as you can expect. Kamala still looked like a deer in headlights.
You could make the argument that some of these issues are not clear and direct and that they're complicated. But at the end of the day, either it's in the bill or it's not. It's in the law, or these are binary. These are black and white. These are not holistic, to use the word that she used 3 times in 30 words. Greg, I don't do a lot of Harris impressions. I don't think I do it as well. But let's just say, Greg, I believe in a holistic approach, and by that, what I mean is that all of my ideas are full of holes, and that's what makes them holistic. It's like a Venn diagram. No, it's not. Anyway, when she says we have to raise taxes, we have to, you and I in this podcast have said lots of times, we have to do something about our deficit, our debt, and the ticking time bomb of a debt. We keep saying it, but they don't. So obviously, you know that saying, you see it in a lot of action movies, failure is not an option. Oh, failure actually is an option. You don't like that option. You don't want that option, but it always is an option. And, when we say we have to do something about deficit, debt, entitlements, spending, all that kind of stuff, Congress can ignore it. Hasn't cost them too much so far. It's cost us, the taxpayers, a great deal, but it hasn't done that. And then just finally, Stephanie Ruhle exceeded our expectations. But they were very, very, very low. Right above earthworms were clearing that low bar that we laid out there. But good for her for asking the question. Like, you aren't guaranteed to have a Senate or a House that's going to see the issue the same way you do it? What are you going to do if it comes to that way? And Harris lined up in punt formation and just kicked that away. Oh, we have to do it. And I think we've always seen, and usually see in the primaries, presidential candidates go out there and say, I'm going to do that. And all of their proposals assume that they have a Congress, a House and a Senate that are completely willing to do exactly what they want. And lo and behold, that never happens. That's, even when you've got a House and a Senate that's in your own party, you will find certain members are a little tougher to get along, and you end up having to make compromises, and the bill's a little bit messier than you expected. In this scenario, on this podcast, we've talked about the likelihood, not a guarantee, but the likelihood that Republicans are looking at worst case scenario 50-50. And if they get any luck in Montana, they got 51. There really is a fair question to Harris to say, all of what you're talking about, assume you will have a cooperative Congress. You're probably not going to have that. So what's your plan B? What do you have that could conceivably get some Republican votes in the Senate? Now, let's point out, getting a Murkowski vote, getting a Susan Collins vote, not the highest bar to clear. And yet Harris still can't address any of that kind of stuff.
And even those two don't love tax increases too much. That's kind of the bread and butter Republican issue, if there ever was one. And so it's obvious that she's flailing once you get past the most basic of talking points, which is what she's memorized, not necessarily what she can do. And she can't really riff well on a topic. I think it was Charlie Cook who said, if any of these journalists actually pursued 3 or 4 follow-up questions, and just the follow-up question was, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, but how? There are a lot of there are certain politicians who are wonks who really love looking at these issues and looking at, really enjoy reading the white papers and getting into the details. It's not surprising that Harris isn't one, but it's kind of surprising that she doesn't have a mental note card of 3 or 4 bullet points to go through on every one of these issues. And the other thing is how much she look, she seems scared to go to any further level of detail. And my suspicion is that because what she wants to do is much further to the left than what can get her elected. So, oh God, if I let them know, people won't like me. Well, yes. So maybe you shouldn't want to do that,
So you think it's more dodging than cluelessness? Or is it a combination?
I suspect, and that's there are problems. I will say it's more dodging than cluelessness. And people will say, Jim, why are you always taking Kamala Harris's side? Why are you always defending her?
Well, it's already not a great day for Kamala. And the reason for that is because her current boss, officially, Joe Biden, was in New York for all the UN stuff, but he also had time to drop by The View. And he gave Kamala Harris what he would consider a fantastic compliment. But given that Kamala's talking about a new way forward and not being burdened by what has been, and Tim Walz saying, oh, we can't have another 4 years like we've had, I don't think Kamala appreciated hearing this.
And as vice president, there wasn't a single thing that I did that she couldn't do. Mm-hmm. And so I was able to delegate her responsibility on everything from foreign policy to domestic policy.
Sounds like they're in lockstep, Jim. Just what she wants to hear.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message. Just run that. Just run that audio. Because one of the recurring questions that we've asked, and Trump finally got around to it at the very end of the debate, is what did you want to do that Biden would not allow you to do for the past 3.5 years? And if there wasn't any objection from the president, well, why didn't you do it? Have you just been sitting around? Did you just, and according to Biden in that statement, that there wasn't any significant policy difference. And we should point out that there really we haven't heard a great deal about the idea that Harris wanted to move policy in a very different direction. Maybe a little more hostile to Israel. Maybe, clearly she had very little interest in anything resembling tougher line on the border for the first 3 years of being in office. So what it is that she's just the placeholder. She's just the continuation of the status quo, which is not going to do her any good. And again, I think the Trump campaign should get out, put that statement right there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, doing her no favors, but it's accurate. I got to give him credit for that. So anyway, back with the more of Biden on The View a little bit later in the podcast. All right, Jim, last night, we're minding our own business. You get a little beep on the phone. Looks like it's a news alert. And you're like, okay, what's happening now? Eric Adams, New York City mayor, about to be indicted. And it looks like he is, in fact, being indicted. You talk about this a lot in the Morning Jolt today on a number of different levels. But according to the New York Times, investigators have been focusing since 2021, which is the year he got elected mayor, on whether Mr. Adams and his campaign conspired with the Turkish government to receive illegal foreign donations, and on whether Mr. Adams pressured fire department officials to sign off on the opening of a high-rise consulate building for the Turkish government despite safety concerns. Now, we also saw a bunch of Adams administration officials resigning over the last several days, which is usually a sign that everything's falling apart. But Adams, unbowed, at least for now, comes out with a statement last night, and here's part of it.
It is now my belief that the federal government intends to charge me with crimes. If so, these charges will be entirely false, based on lies. But they would not be surprising. I always knew that if I stood my ground for all of you, that I would be a target, and a target I became.
Classic politician. The only reason I'm in trouble right now is because I stood up for you. Jim, you do an excellent job of explaining how Adams is not an isolated incident with some of this foreign interference. What do you make of his particular case?
Well, my first reaction when you saw the headline was the Turks. The Turks. Not Qatar, not the Egyptians. How based on the reporting of my colleague Jimmy Quinn, how is he not getting indicted for all the money he took from the Chinese? Like, what And then the thing was really kind of mind-boggling about this, because you're thinking, like, what did the Turks want with the mayor of New York City? What could he do for them? It sounds like something out of The Sopranos, at least according to the New York Times. Investigators have focused since 2021, basically when he was elected, whether Adams and his campaign conspired with the Turkish government to receive illegal foreign donations, and whether Adams pressured fire department officials to sign off on the opening of a high-rise consulate building for the Turkish government despite safety concerns. Now, this is about like the fire department approval. That's what this came down to, really? They're a NATO ally, but if they want to set up a consulate that's like the Towering Inferno, you know what? It's their sovereign territory. You let them. I've lived in Turkey for a while. I know their building code. Plenty of the buildings are good. Lots of them. But not all of them, but lots of them. So, but anyway, that's this. Now, I heard a lot of people, as soon as I write the Jolt, saying, Jim, this is really because this isn't really about bribery. This is lawfare. This is the Biden administration targeting him because he was a critic of Biden's migrant policy. Well, first of all, I don't really buy that, because that basically turns into excuse making. The idea of, look, because of Biden's migrant policy, Mayor Adams had no choice but to take all that money from the Turks. It was, kind of giving him a little bit of a get out of jail free card, which he may actually need soon. But the second thing is, let's point out, he was never really a critic of Biden migrant policy in the sense of like, oh, we should shut down the border. We should, be sending these people back. We should have much tighter standards for asylum.
Just wanted more money.
No, He just wanted the money. He wanted more federal funding to help take care of them. So that's really giving him credit that I think he doesn't deserve for that. But the other, this is all made up by the government. No. Basically, his, go down the list, because he's had his NYPD commissioner announced his resignation earlier this month. Chief legal counsel also resigned. The school's chancellor announced he's resigning by the end of the year, and the health commissioner announced he too will be leaving his post by the. Now, we should point out, this health commissioner is different from the health commissioner who was hosting sex parties in his apartment during COVID. I know it's very easy to get the New York City health commissioners and health officials mixed up. This was not the guy who was exchanging bodily fluids when all of us were supposed to stay away from our relatives and friends and neighbors and all that stuff. I just want to clarify that this is probably garden variety corruption. It's not the weird, sex party corruption. So let's be clear. I'm doing my part to defend the good name of the previous health commissioner, or the current health commissioner, depending on which one you think is worse. Look, when everybody's resigning, that's a sign. To me, that's a sign that it's not just smoke and mirrors. That where there's smoke, there's fire. Eric Adams has been a colossal disappointment in New York as New York City mayor. You can point to individual decisions he's made that worked out okay, but he was seen. Look, he's a former cop. People thought he would be tougher on crime. I don't think you can say he's been anything. You can point to maybe a minor decline here and there. far to go along to get along. And look, if this had not occurred this week, we'd probably be talking about the fact that he gave the city to Sean P. Diddy Combs.
The key to the city, yes.
The key to the city, yes. Well, I mean, maybe he gave the whole city. I don't know. Yes. When that's not the worst thing you did, that's a really bad sign.
That's true. Yes, I will never be a public official. If I were, I would certainly hope I would not be on the take. I don't think I would be on the take. And as a Greek person, it certainly wouldn't be from the Turks. But I do want to run the Andy McCarthy principle past you. The Andy McCarthy principle is that Democrats only prosecute Democrats to benefit other Democrats. So it's not that Adams isn't worthy of this indictment. It's kind of like with Menendez, but it's interesting that it ramps up or intensifies when Menendez, for example, opposes the Iran nuclear deal, or Adams goes public about how he's frustrated by policy.
Yeah, at some point they've done something to no longer be a Democrat in good standing. I see that argument, and I can see the suspicion lining up here. On the other hand, I don't think that should be anybody on the right should stick their neck out to defend Menendez. Let me put it this way. Earlier this week, I was on a special report with Bret Baier. I had a chance to run into a Democratic senator who I will not identify. I don't like talking about what we talk about in the green room, but I will just say that this unnamed Democratic senator wearing cargo shorts, so it could be anybody, could have been any of them. I mentioned Senator Menendez, and this senator, who again could be anybody from any state that generates coal and steel, said, "Oh yeah, well he's that blank head," and one, it just made me just like, boy, I love, you love what a particular senator won't beat around the bush. And like the Senate is a better place for Menendez being gone. Eric Adams deserves his day in court just like everybody else. The person who would take over as mayor is apparently like a full-on, socialist communist. So that's not really, it's something we're all cheering for. I have heard people I respect, including Charlie Gasparino of Fox News, who made the argument that from the conservative perspective, it's conceivable that the most rightward option, the best option for conservatives in next year's Democratic mayoral primary, could conceivably be Andrew Cuomo. And I are the other ones cannibals? Were they at the P. Diddy? Because it took Andrew Cuomo, from early on in COVID, we heard about the nursing homes, hey, this guy is not a good guy. And of course, with his brother, he's celebrating on CNN. And then the book deal, and then the fact that he had his staffers working on the book and the sexual harassment. Andrew Cuomo was a really bad guy for a long time. And it took an enormous weight of scandals to finally take him down. And New York City's Democrats are so messed up that, there are people who look and say, can we get Cuomo back? Is that the best option? Is it,
That's what I saw. I think it was at Axios this morning. I'm like, the ink isn't even dry on the indictment. And Cuomo's allies, and apparently there still are some, saying, you know what? This would be great. He would actually have more power over the budget and, policy in New York City than he would in the state of New York. And so...
And
Jim,
this time he's going to kill fewer old people. He swears. He's
maybe.
Longer the mass murderer of senior citizens they used to be.
Well, there's fewer people in the city than the entire state, so I guess that's potentially the case. But
at some point, I run out of senior citizens and I stop killing them.
Jim, I don't know what year did he resign? 22, 21? I don't even remember anymore. But have you missed hearing? Listen, here's what's going to happen in New York. I don't miss that. I like doing the impression, but I don't miss him at all.
I was going to say, really? Are sleazeballs that want to run for mayor? Is Anthony Weiner busy or something? I'm really grasping at straws here,
I know. And
honest to goodness, wouldn't we love it if gun-grabbing Mike Bloomberg came back? Throw him up against the wall and frisk him, Mike Bloomberg, compared to these guys, at least he was a capitalist, so...
Nobody wants de Blasio back, so there's still a flicker of hope. All rationale hasn't been lost.
There's 8 million people in that city.
Man, just not a lot of good options, because Adams was the moderate in that primary, which is insane. But yeah, please, not Cuomo.
Would taxing the rich actually solve our problems? The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. All of America's 550 billionaires have a combined net worth of $2.5 trillion. Even if we tax them at 100%, we'd have enough money to fund the government for 8 months. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, we promised you more of Joe Biden on The View, and we'll get to that in just a second. But this particular clip is part of a larger narrative that keeps going. You know, when Joe Biden gave his address to the nation after saying he decided, after all, not to seek a second term as president, never really gave a reason, just said it was time to pass the torch. Something about preserving democracy was in there, too. So he goes and gives his speech to the UN General Assembly earlier this week. In a way, he's trying to tell autocrats that, you know, your people and the future of your country is more important than you, which is a good point. But in the process, totally gaslighting the world and the American people about what really happened back in July.
As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward. My fellow leaders, let us never forget, some things are more important than staying in power. It's your people.
I decided. I mean, Julius Caesar could have looked at that circle around Joe Biden in July and said, man, that's a lot of knives. So
I decided to have some acupuncture on my back. It'd been a little stiff.
But then he goes on The View yesterday, and Alyssa Farah, who's part of that panel now, had worked for Trump, now hates Trump, CNN contributor, all that stuff, asked Biden, you know, how's it going with Nancy Pelosi? And tell me a little bit more about the decision. It's not any more convincing.
Did you feel that your hand was forced, and what is your relationship with Speaker Pelosi now?
My relationship is fine. Look, I never fully believed the assertions that somehow there was this overwhelming reluctance of my running again. I didn't sense that. And although the polling, as I said, Biden's polling was different, the fact of the matter is my polling was about, we're always within range of beating this guy.
Yeah.
And, but what I did was, I think there were, it makes sense. There were some folks who would like to see me step aside so they have a chance to move on. I get that. That's just human nature. But that wasn't the reason that I stepped down. I stepped down because I started thinking about it. You know, it's hard to think of, I know you're only 30, but it's hard to think of, it's hard for me to even say how old I am.
So didn't think about it after the midterms, didn't think about it at all in 2023. It was only after the entire primary process and then a disastrous debate performance that it suddenly dawned on him, maybe it's time to pass the torch. And he did talk about, people who could advance. So maybe Kamala had a bigger hand in this than we previously knew. I don't know if that was a subtle jab there, but Jim, I mean, this is just complete fiction and everyone knows it. But I'm wondering now, because you got Sonny Hostin joining people at MSNBC saying, oh, he's the latest George Washington, just doing it for the good of the country. We all know that's a bunch of malarkey.
He's not even the next Marvin Washington. By the way, when they asked him the question, and his first reaction is, I guess the Kamala Harris giggle is contagious. You know, it just is there nitrous oxide leaking into the studio? Yeah. First, actually, go back even further. Biden at the UN was really sad, and not just because he's an old guy who has a tough time getting through his speeches. Look, we get told a million times he was Senate Foreign Relations Committee chairman and knew all the foreign leaders, and he walks into office and America is back and all that stuff. You look around the world and try to ask yourself, other than the pandemic being gone, where is America stronger, more secure, in better shape, or have more leverage around the globe right now? Middle East? Hell no. Middle East is burning, right? We're not helping Israel take on Hezbollah. Apparently we just can't decide who the good guy in that conflict is. Hamas commits the greatest, biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Iran on the march. Houthis still shutting down shipping in the Red Sea, right? Eastern Europe really want to help the Ukrainians. Ukrainians would say, hey, don't be really nice. We could do some long-range strikes, but you can't do that. War's in its third year. No end in sight. Does Taiwan look more secure? I don't oppose the AUKUS submarine deal. I'm glad he got, Japan and China to work together. But really, overall, compared to where China was a couple of years ago, where China is today, do you feel like the odds of Chinese military aggression when they're ramming into Philippine ships every other day, does it feel like we've actually gained leverage over there? No. As we pointed out earlier in this podcast, there's foreign influence operations around every corner in this state. Like there really wasn't a lot to brag about if you're Joe Biden trying to wrap up your foreign policy legacy. So he does that, and then he has to say, "Oh, but I voluntarily stepped down." Look, we're not going to know until the White House memoirs get told. But they're all going to say some version of, "Hey, you know what? Behind the scenes, Joe Biden was in really rough shape." Because we got all these stories now, right? The only thing is that people couldn't put their name on it. I don't know who's going to be the first one to come out and say, yeah, Biden was losing his memory in the White House. But somebody's going to come out and say it. It's not going to happen now. It's going to happen after he's safely out of office. But people who want to write these books want to, sell a lot of copies. And they're going to this is the juiciest stuff they have. So we're going to hear that Biden, was no longer fully functional. And that there was an active effort to cover this up from the American people. And that's why he almost never did press events. And that's why some people, I'll be honest, I figured Biden would be just good enough in that debate. And then he went out there and until we finally defeat Medicare. Everyone's like, what? Grandpa belongs in a home. Never mind the Oval Office behind the Resolute desk with access to the button. And, that's why he lost. And the idea that, I suddenly started thinking about my legacy after I had completely collapsed on the debate stage. It was totally coincidental timing. And right after, you know what, Greg? We've had a Hollywood actor on the program. We should put out an invitation to George Clooney and say, do you have a second opinion on whether Joe Biden voluntarily reevaluated whether it was time for someone else to take over?
The fingerprints are all over this. Pelosi, Obama, a lot of other folks finally wearing him down on that sort of stuff. But
I remind you, the last public event he did before the announcement, when he got COVID, he was out in the West Coast and he did an interview. He was doing an interview with BET Radio. And he said, he was talking about getting criticism from racists. And he says, when I put the Secretary of Defense, the black man, he could not remember the name of Lloyd Austin in a live interview. You think that's entirely coincidental that he's having really bad public appearance? The Lester Holt interview, he didn't have any good interviews after the debate. He just had varying degrees of bad.
You and I know what happened. Everybody who pays attention right now knows it's happening. But given the narrative that's happening among the Democrats, certainly in the media, most academia has left. If our grandkids ever study this moment in school, are they going to get the skinny on this? Or are they going to be told that, oh, what a selfless, heroic act by a noble gentleman?
Well, they'll look at their textbooks and say, that's not what Grandpa Jim and Grandpa Greg rant about all the time in their, in their food tubes or whatever. They're probably Cuomo will be turning us into Soylent Green by that point. But just a sign that, here's the thing. We were discussing this on the editors this year. I do think the story will come out because I think the fact that so much came out after the debate demonstrated that Democrats do not have a particular loyalty to Biden the way they did to Barack Obama, the way they did to Bill Clinton, the way they probably will have to Kamala Harris. Remember, Joe Biden was the placeholder in 2020. They just wanted to beat Trump. And it was just a matter, and the expectation was that he was going to be the bridge candidate. And that at some point Harris would take over. And it turns out she did. But up until this summer, up until July, the plan was it's going to be Biden for another 4 years. And everybody knew that was ridiculous. So anyway, I think the truth will eventually come out. And you and I will not be bitter old men. But hoping not. I'll just be looking at all the Jets championships between now and then to cheer me up. All the times they beat the Bears in the Super Bowl.
Well, I think if Kamala loses, we'll hear about it a lot sooner than if she wins, but we'll find out. Jim, have a great day. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Do subscribe to the podcast. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Thursday. Join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.